right, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the RevOps Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Henderson, and I'm joined by my usual co-hosts. Go ahead and do your intros, fellas.
Hey, guys. Brandon Redlinger here.
And Jonathan Stevens.
Nice. And this week, we are going to talk about account scoring, which has been a subject that Jonathan has probably wanted to talk about for a long time, but I always think that it sounds kind of boring. And we did, I actually had to do a bit of a look back. I was like, did we already do this? Like, it feels like we did this. No, we did lead scoring.
We did lead scoring.
And we talked about some account scoring with Jon Miller.
That's true.
So if anybody has questions about that, go to the last episode. It's probably way more valuable than this one. I'll just preface this whole episode with that. That episode was better than this one's going to be, I promise. Anyways, but account scoring, super important, super valuable, different than lead scoring, right? So let's start where we always start. Anybody want to give me the old definition, the old razzle-dazzle 'em with the definition of account scoring?
Are you guys ready for this?
Don't do it, Jonathan. Don't do it.
Okay, fine, Brandon.
Not today. I am in no mood for this today. None whatsoever. I'm one day away from my first vacation in like 2 years. Don't mess with me.
Don't mess with him now. Well, I think account score, like lead score. I mean, I don't have a definition that I'm going to read from, but. Because I didn't prepare like I should have for this one. I prepare as much as I do every time. But anyway, it's really prioritizing the accounts that you're going after instead of just the leads that you're going after. So it's taking the entire account into consideration for both your sales and marketing efforts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's assigning an estimated value or assigning a value to accounts based on a wide array of indicators that would say how close they are in proximity to your ideal customer profile or what their intent is to purchase, that sort of thing. Right?
Yeah, totally.
Jonathan, why did you point at yourself?
I was trying to tell you to get closer to the mic.
Oh, weird. Anyways, I don't know.
That's the only way I can think to do it.
2 fingers pointing at yourself means. I thought you had something valuable to add. I was just thinking you can just use your voice.
Call on me.
You use your words and speak. You don't have to raise your hand. But all right. Anyway, I will try to be closer to the mic, I guess, so Jonathan doesn't do weird things. Anyway, so it's assigning value to an account based on proximity to ICP, likelihood to buy, that sort of thing, right? And it's helpful. The next thing would be, why would you use it? And the way I would use account scoring is mostly for targeting. I mean, ideally, that's the most valuable reason of it, right? Like, you have limited ad spend budget, you have limited bandwidth for outbounding from a sales team's perspective. You have a huge ICP globally, right? Most companies, if they looked up like our total addressable market, when you do your TAM, is like billions of dollars and just like hundreds of thousands of companies. And you probably don't have the bandwidth, even if you're a Fortune 500 company, to target all of them at the same time or do it well, right? And so it's helping you to identify where to spend that money and where to target. Anything you guys want to add on to that? Jonathan, you want to point at yourself and then raise your hand? I'll call on you.
Right here. All
right, Jonathan.
Do it.
What do you want to add?
And I think it's also just allocating resources appropriately, not just money, but actually the time spent. So your marketing team's going to spend a lot of time gathering the right leads and the right contacts, your sales team doing the same thing. So if you've got sales and marketing focused on accounts that aren't going to be worth a damn, then it's going to just set you back for failure. Yeah.
And even if you're, say you're like a Fortune 500 company and you have sales reps, so you might have a sales rep who just has Western Los Angeles, right? Like, they might be limited in territory to that level of degree, which is very common. And say you're working at like Thomson Reuters or something, and you're selling just to West Los Angeles. That's still like 1,000 law firms to sell into. I mean, probably more, right? And so you still have to figure out some way to prioritize which of those 1,000 law firms do I want my sales rep to work on first, right? Because even though it's a very small segment, there's still some level of prioritization needed. And so doesn't matter how big or small, it just helps every piece of the funnel prioritize time, resources, everything, sort of.
Yep.
Sweet. Cool. Brandon's just nodding. We're moving on. Anyways.
I have nothing to add to that.
But an important caveat, and I'll let wait, I moved too far away. Jonathan's going to yell at me. An important caveat.
He's going to point.
An important caveat here, I think, is that lead scoring is not account scoring, and account scoring is not lead scoring. Now, the two things probably play into each other a little bit, and that's a sort of interesting nuance, is if a lead converts and it's on an account with a really high account score, probably a good lead too, right? Like that can play into your lead scoring, but lead scoring is not account scoring. Account scoring refers to ranking a whole organization of things that are considered, ranking the whole organization based on the things you're considering, like intent data and ICP fit and that sort of thing. Lead scoring is ranking just one individual based on, probably similar criteria, but you're just ranking that one person. And so you might have a lead that has a really low score that's at an account that has a great score. Say it's an intern, right? Terrible lead. Wonderful account. Doesn't matter. Two things are relatively independent, but can play into each other. So just sort of an important caveat. I think it was like episode 4 we did lead scoring. We did that a long time ago. Like Star Wars episode 4, terrible, but probably good. Maybe it was a good episode. I don't know. I don't remember. It was probably not our strongest. I don't know. Go listen to the Jon Miller one. Whatever. Anyways, I'm getting off track. All right. So this is going to be a fun one because Jonathan and I have actually been working on revisiting our account scoring model very in-depthly the past few weeks. And by in-depthly, I mean Jonathan was gone for 2 weeks and I did most of the work and now he's helping. We've been, sort of buried in revisiting our account scoring model, which we do every about 3 months right now. So where to get started? Which is sort of a great. So say you're a company and you're just starting out and you haven't really put in an account scoring model or you're just sort of kicking the tires on, reiterating on your first one. Where do you guys start? Where do you get started? Where would you tell somebody kick this off?
I think the first thing I would do is start with a one sales analysis and see what are the companies, what do companies that buy from you look like, right? So it could be as simple as, mainly your firmographic and technographic data. I think that's just kind of like table stakes these days. But doing that full one sales analysis and then kind of building your ICP out from there. And then on top of that, we did a whole episode on intent data. I would lay your intent data on top of that. And then, the other one that I think is very important that I think a lot of people miss is your first party engagement data too. And how you weight each of those, I think matters a lot. And it is one of those things where you are going to have to, do a little bit of trial and error on it. But I think those are kind of the main pillars of putting a full account score together.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, if you kind of take an inventory of all the data points that you can get to through your tech stack. So if you've got marketing automation, you've got first party data on what pages they're visiting. If you've got 6sense or a third party intent tool, you've got keywords pumping in. You've got a bunch of different data points that you need to kind of outline and then figure out how much weight am I giving to this data.
Totally.
Exactly.
Right. So I think you guys are step 1 and step 2. Step 1, set up your ICP. Like you can't do account scoring because account scoring is based on proximity to ICP at the end of the day, right?
Right.
You can't do that if you don't know what your ICP is, definitionally. I can't say how close is this to my ICP if I don't have an ICP. So
you're asking what companies have the highest propensity to buy.
Right.
Just look at the ones who bought already.
Right. So set up your ICP, get to a firm level on that, and then scoring scheme. Then you're talking about actually figuring out what are the actual criteria that I would use to assign, some sort of a weighted score, and it's probably 10, 15 different criteria, and determining how I want to weight those is also important. It's not just, and you can start flat. You could say, hey, I want 10 criteria. They're all going to be weighted evenly. That's great. That's a starting point. But the reality is what I would do, and what we do here actually, is just grab a spreadsheet, go in and say, hey, here's the 15 data points that we want to look at when we determine, the score of an account. And then we'll go through and say this one, which is high intent page visits, is more valuable than just website visits. Because if they're visiting this blog post, that's less valuable than if they're visiting our demo request form, right? We know that to be true. And so if they visit the demo request form, that equals 5 points in their score. And if they visit just the website, but not the demo request form, that's 2 points in their score. And we can map that out in a spreadsheet and then build that into our account scoring model, which allows us to do that. Because you're going to want some of that nuance. Other added benefit of that is that 3 months later, when you're like, I don't think our account scoring is great, you have a spreadsheet that spells out what it looks like. So you can go look at that spreadsheet and go, why did we put that in there? What are we doing? Which, by the way, you will do. It will absolutely happen to you. There were like 4 in ours that I was like, what? Why did we build this? Like, what were we doing?
And I think the last thing you ever want to do in that scenario is overcomplicate it, because you can always continue to add data points, but unwinding it is going to be much more difficult than adding to it. So if you're going to start simple and build onto it as you start to see it working for you.
1,000%. Use the ones you know, especially if you're going to, because you're going to have to convince the sales and marketing teams as a RevOps person that this account scoring is actually accurate to some degree, right? So use the stuff you're absolutely certain of at the start, because that'll create buy-in, because they'll actually see success with it. They'll see like these are actually the good accounts, and then they'll go, hey, our account scoring model works. Then you can tweak it and play with things as you go, but they'll be bought in already, so it'll be good to go, which is super important. And then the last sort of step for me is actually prioritizing. So once I have my scoring scheme in place, it's built out, then I actually prioritize these for the reps, right? Reps, marketing, etc. Like feeding it to the different parts of the machine so that everybody can then action it appropriately. And this is where I would go back to the Jon Miller episode. Exactly. Nomenclature is important.
It matters a lot.
Do not name them tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. We did that, and we messed it up terribly. Name them 1-to-1, 1-to-few, 1-to-many, etc., right? The actions that you're actually expecting them to take, because, and Jon will again have explained this a million times better than I can, if you name them tier 1, every rep will say, well, why aren't all of my accounts tier 1? And marketing will, it won't drive the right behavior. It drives the wrong behavior, is the end of the day thing. So, 1-to-1, 1-to-few, 1-to-many. And I actually got messages after that episode that were like, do you actually believe that? Are you really switching it? Yes, we are. We did switch it. 1,000%. Jon Miller was right. We were wrong. We switched it. Perks of doing the podcast. We're learning things. Some people are smarter than us. So, cool. So that's my sort of like overview of where to get started. What else would you guys add to that? And I know I like summarized most of what you guys said, but anything else we'd add to that?
I think enforcement's a pretty important one too, because if you've got these hot accounts and nobody's enforcing these reps to work them, then that's just as bad, because you've done all this work to identify these things and then they're just sitting there collecting dust. So I think somebody's got to hold the hand to the fire to make sure those guys are getting worked when they are identified as hot accounts. And that can be done through alerts and also through management. Or
you can get a tool that allows you to automate a bunch of that work, like Revenue.io.
There you go.
Puts people into sequence for reps and then puts them in their dialers so they know when to call them, and does that all queued up for them. I mean, there are products like our own out there that do such things, just for everybody listening. Hint, nudge, nudge. We do this. It's awesome.
But I think that's an important point, because that's the entire point of having your different tiers, right?
Right.
Like, so one thing that we do we did at Engagio, and I think it's so important to do, is we called it account entitlement, but it's saying for my 1-to-1 accounts, this is what they get. They get, $500 for direct mail for every key persona. They get an executive workshop. They get all these things. But on the other side of that, it's, all right, here is what we expect from you, sales rep. It doesn't go longer than 14 days without you sending a personal email, right? We're not going to send any Marketo blasts. You have to touch this account so many days. You have to do all these things to this account. And then, so you're listing out all of your resources. That's time, that's budget, that's tools. And then you're allocating that properly across your different tiers. Because what we saw all the time at Engagio and Demandbase was, they put too many people into their top tier accounts, and then they couldn't work them properly.
Right. And then you're wasting ad spend because they're not getting worked properly.
You're wasting ad spend. You have too many of them where you don't know how to actually prioritize them. So I always tell people there's absolutely no shame in having fewer 1-to-1 accounts. It's actually probably better for you. Like probably 90% of the companies that we talked to chose too many tier 1 accounts, or again, we called it tier 1 at the time, but that 1-to-1 accounts than they should have in the beginning, and they always scale it back.
And super important, right? And I'm very cognizant of that here. And that, by the way, that's a RevOps question too. RevOps should know what's our capacity to do 1-to-1s. And you were in a meeting with me and our CMO last week where I was like, I understand you guys want to run this ABM campaign. There's no outbound capacity to support it, so it's not going to be an ABM campaign. We're not doing it. Like we are doing other things. We don't have the bandwidth. Let's switch this. Let's go after more of a demand gen with that same messaging, but we got to align to our capacity right now, and that's where it's at. And
exactly,
there's no shame in that. We were all like, yeah, that's smart. We shouldn't do it this way because it's not going to work, right?
And it goes against every bit of your instinct to not want to just cast the wide net and get all of the people into your wide net, and you can't think of it like that in your top tiers. Your top tiers cannot be a wide net approach, and that's got to be your.
It's like I used to go to the gym with this guy, and he would he would tell me, leave your ego at the door when you came in the gym.
Yes,
100%. Because you can't get a good workout in if you're worried about how other people see you, right? Like, I want to make sure I look great, do all these things, and blah, blah, blah. Leave your ego at the door, you're gonna have a great workout. It's the same thing when it comes to this. Leave your ego at the door. You don't need to cast a wide net. You'd rather do it right and do it small than do it wrong and do it big, right?
Yep.
And so don't do it for the sake of doing it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to move on. What are some, and we're going to get to, by the way, everybody, the 201 series. I thought that we couldn't jump straight into the 201 because we hadn't talked about account scoring, but we will talk about metrics to measure account scoring at the end here. But before we get there, important considerations and challenges that you guys have seen in account scoring before. And I have one sort of like low-hanging one that I'm sure Jonathan is going to jump on very, very fast. But I'm just gonna let you guys, Jonathan, what's a important consideration and challenge when setting up account scoring?
Well, now I'm trying to think of the specific one you're thinking of.
Well, I mean, it's the only thing you ever say on the podcast, so I assume you're going to get it.
Make sure your data's in order.
Yeah, right. Like,
Got it. Yeah. Winning.
But it is actually the most important thing for this because you're talking about using a large data set to determine the prioritization of how you're approaching your GTM strategy. So having clean data is very, very important when doing that. It's one of the most important times to have data, if not the most. So to add to that data point, so make sure you don't have duplicate accounts. Make sure you've got the right assignments on the accounts. Make sure everybody's owning the right things, because if you've got old owners on accounts or contacts or leads, then they may be getting missed. So I think making sure that ownership is in place is a must, and then making sure you don't have duplicates is a huge one on the data side. Totally. There's another piece of that that's sort of like the next component of it, which data quality, having all of that, data hygiene, data quality, super, super important, right? The next one is account association for me. And you actually did all the work at Revenue.io of building out lead converts they associate to account, and that impacts the account score. That is a intense thing to build out. Super important, but very, very valuable. And it's something that if we hadn't taken the time to build that out, our account scoring would be far less accurate than it is. So I would say that for me, at least, that's an important challenge and consideration. It's something that you probably want to get started on sooner rather than later if you want to do some account scoring. Not absolutely necessary to kick off some version of account scoring, but you're going to want to get there sooner rather than later. So
to operationalize it, I think you have to. You have to prioritize it early, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's going to take you some time to build it. So you could launch a V1 without it, but get started on it at the same time. Go get somebody to build it for you. What other things? I got a couple more, but I'll see if you guys got something that surprised me.
Well, one that really comes to mind for me is scoring your accounts is not a marketing exercise. It's not a sales exercise. Right. It's a lot of people even leave CS out of it. Like, I really firmly believe you have to have all three at the table. Right. And I think these days a lot of people know, yeah, you're right. It has to be sales and marketing. But CS brings so much insight to the table on what actually a good customer looks like. Right. They could be paying you a lot of money, but CS is like, man, they're the biggest headache. This one integration that they have keeps breaking or whatever it is. And it's like they will give you great insight into what an actual great customer looks like.
That's
right?
a good point. And I think CS and support can also maybe help you land the right titles, because they're going to be working with and seeing the different titles at different companies that are actually the champions of the product, maybe more so than sales and marketing would. Yeah, I had this one listed as understanding the buyer in whole, which is to say, like, what are the key stakeholders? What do they actually own typically in these accounts? Because, for instance, if a director of sales ops is a great one, maybe that's worth 3 points in my model, where the head of revenue operations is worth 10 points, because I know that those are the stakeholders that they typically have in my model. And so things like that, which CS is a wonderful, to you guys' point, wonderful resource in understanding who's the actual stakeholder, who's the contract signer, who's the decision maker, that sort of stuff. I think to add to that, understanding the business challenges that company is facing. So if you're trying to sell them a product that they don't care about, then that's not good for anybody. So you need to make sure you understand how the company you're going after sells and how their organization is structured.
Totally. Right? How do they make money, and how does the person you're selling to specifically make money? And then how do you connect your product to helping them do that?
Yep.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Anything else on this one?
I think one other thing worth mentioning, we saw this a lot too at Engagio and Demand Base, was people just overcomplicate they start off with too many data points, right? And then from there, things don't work out, or they have, I mean, I guess the data gets just messy and they don't know what to do. So they have to start all over again. I think it goes back to your point earlier, is start out simple.
Well, you know what's worse than no account scoring? It's bad account scoring, right? Because if my account scoring is broken and everything that's a terrible target is showing up as my best targets, I'd rather have no scoring whatsoever. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like at least then we have a shot in the dark. If I'm feeding the wrong accounts, period, we're just doing work for no reason. And so choose the things that you know work, and then iterate slowly but move quickly, right? So do the things you know that work. Get a model that's functional, bare minimum. Add in one data later. If it screws up the model entirely, pull it out within 2 weeks. Like decide and iterate rapidly. That way you're not basing it on a model that's not working anymore. Super good point though. It's a really bad experience, and also will bankrupt your company if you use a bad model for a long period of time. So don't do that.
Exactly.
To that point, I think setting goal criteria. So having goals in mind of what you're trying to accomplish when you do this. So like if I have 100 top tier accounts, what's my goal out of those 100 top tier accounts? I think it's important to always work towards a goal with something.
Totally. So let's shift into that then. Metrics to measure account scoring. And I'll start with one that I think is sort of in piecemeal with setting up account scoring, is sort of work backwards and measure what buckets they're actually falling into as total, right? So if you have 50,000 accounts, how many are landing in one-to-one? How many are landing in one-to-few? How many are landing in one-to-many? And does that actually align to your budget and resource capacity? So I would look at my business first as a whole and say, as a business, here's how we want to treat one-to-ones. Here's how we want to treat one-to-fews. Here's how we want to treat one-to-manys. Based on what we want to accomplish across these three buckets, we can have X amount of accounts in A, X amount of accounts in B, and X amount of accounts in C. Therefore, when I go and actually put my model in place, I want to make sure that those numbers actually align, like the resulting numbers of those 50,000 accounts align to my capacity. If they don't, I probably want to tweak my numbers, right? I want to tweak my model a little bit to get a little stricter and minimize some of those numbers, or increase my numbers to get more accounts into the funnel, whatever that looks like. That would be the first metric that I would use and how I would fix it if I see it. What are some other metrics that you guys would use to measure your account scoring?
I think call sentiment is a good one. Understanding how the calls are going when they're getting in touch.
Yeah.
Understanding whether they're showing propensity to buy or if they're just pushing you off. I think that's an important indicator to know how hard to put the foot to the pedal on those accounts.
Totally. Like percentage of calls with a positive sentiment per bucket, right? Wonderful metric to say, hey, this is what, if you look at your one-to-ones and there's only 2% with positive sentiment and your one-to-manys have like 32%, your model is ass backwards. So you're right. Like it's a great way to evaluate the success of it. It should get progressively better the further down that funnel they go. And so, yeah, totally. I love that one. Brandon?
So what I'm thinking of, just the health of my funnel and my accounts, I want to know the volume, the value, the velocity, and the conversions for each tier at every stage of the funnel.
Yep.
Right. And how they're trending over time specifically. And that will really tell me just, again, the overall health of my pipeline in general, or my whole, model.
Because you're talking about pre-pipeline funnel health, right?
Yeah. All the way through, the way through. Right. Looking at, again, value, volume, velocity, and conversion.
Totally. And that's those are all great, and there's lots of ways to measure those. So when I think about it, I think of it like ops created per tier, right? Because I know that I'm still working leads in all three of those tiers, or working accounts in all those tiers. I want to see where I'm creating the most opportunities from. Stage progression rate through those three buckets. Because ideally, if I've set my model up appropriately, I should have marketing resources pushing people from my scoring from one to many to one to few to one to one, right? Like they should progress through there and then into the pipeline. Now, it's totally fine if they jump straight from one to many into my pipeline. Like if somebody answers the phone and jumps over, that's great. That's going to happen. That's wonderful. But measure that too. Like, are we getting that all the time? And if so, let's adjust our approach, right? So I would use those on top of that sort of ops against tier. I think is a really fun one. Like you timestamp, hey, what score was this in? Like was it in one to few, one to many, one to one-to-one when we created the opportunity, and then look back and say, hey, like we created 30% of our opportunities came from one-to-many. Like that's crazy. We should change our scoring to expand, more outreach into those, or take a look at what messaging and what approach we're using there and maybe use it elsewhere across the funnel, because it's obviously super effective and a cost-effective way to gather new pipeline. So anything else you guys would add to this?
Well, one other thing that I'm kind of thinking of that we always pay a lot of attention to is if you're really in enterprise deals, it takes a long time to go from one stage to another. So what are some of those just early indicators or those leading indicators that correlate with wins? And I mean, like one thing that we always paid a lot of attention to, and I know companies do, is just how many contacts am I adding per account per my tier one every month. Per tier two, I see. I'm still saying tiers. I'm used to saying one-to-one, one-to-many yet.
Get it together, all right?
Damn it!
Get it. No, but yeah, contacts added is. I mean, well, you won't move the needle on those accounts unless contacts are being added. So it is something to set expectations for and then carefully police. Because again, if you're not meeting that behavior, it is not going to work.
Yeah, and not only adding the contacts, but making sure the contacts that are getting added are actually getting touched. So they're getting emails and getting calls. Because sometimes you can be adding all the contacts, but then they're just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah, and marketing content, getting all the above, right? Like if sales adds contacts to a one-to-one account, that person should be getting marketing like it should both ways. Everybody, it doesn't matter where the contact comes from. The whole approach needs to be hitting it because you're using account scoring to target your entire GTM approach. So use it everywhere.
And if they're coming in cold, you've got to warm them up to that brand name. So it's going to be a lot easier of a conversation for the rep to have if they've already kind of become familiarized with the brand and what they do. Totally. What is it? What did Randy Freese say? Like 11 pieces of content to get them warmed up?
11.4. Yeah.
11.4.
How do we get 0.4 across?
It's usually that 0.4 that gets me. It's usually I'm internally in the back of my mind, I see a piece of content like, that's 11.4. This is pretty good. I gotta get over there. Yeah. I gotta get in. Yeah, send me that contract, guys who are ready to buy. Wow. Anyway, we're digressing. Cool. Any other thoughts you guys want to add to account scoring? Because otherwise, I'm going to move on to the final segment of the week.
I say this every time. The one other thing I want to say.
Yeah. This is like the fifth other thing you want to say.
Yeah, exactly. I just now that it's kind of on the top of my mind, when you have your large enterprise accounts and you have we did this a lot at Engagio. My reps are only choosing 5 or 6 of my one-to-one accounts, but then say they're a quarter in and they've already dispositioned those out. So now they have 3 or 4 left now, right? So what do? What we did was actually had another part of our one-to-many was actually these 5 are what we called on the docket.
Yeah.
So once I disposition one of these out, it's closed lost, or maybe we won it, right? I still want to be fair to that rep and say, okay, let me add another account to your one-to-one. So we had this like small pool of on the docket accounts that are ready to go.
Can I just say, like, the missed opportunity to use on deck or in the hole, which would be a great baseball reference for on the docket. On the docket. Which is like a courthouse reference for what it's worth. That is a reference to like, oh yeah, I've got your defendant on the docket for 10:30.
On the docket.
Like that's what that is referencing. You're referencing like criminal justice instead of baseball. I just want to point that out. Everybody listening.
I'm not a baseball player.
John Miller was right about one nomenclature thing. That one's bad. Use on deck or in the hole for this. Not
I'm going bullpen.
On the docket. Yeah, in the bullpen, also great. On standby would be fine. On the docket, the most left field, pun intended, reference I've ever heard.
Enough of these baseball analogies. Enough of baseball.
You see how easy that is, though? And you guys were like, on the docket.
I'm trying to think, is there any hockey equivalent? I don't know if there's a hockey equivalent on the bench.
I mean, on the bench, there's a siren going by. There's a fire in West Hollywood. Sorry, everybody.
Welcome to LA.
Somebody's on the docket over there. Anyways, all right. Anyway, I can't even like address what you actually said because I'm just so distracted by that phrase.
You just wanted to, you just wanted to grill me for that.
Docket.
That's what we called it.
I mean, yeah. Wow. All right. Cool. Let's move on then. Unless Brandon has one more thing he wants to work in.
No, not this
time. No, that one ended it.
I'm out of things.
I'm out of things. All right,
yeah.
So it's time for This Week on LinkedIn. All right, so I got a message. I'm actually not going to read the name or the name of the company because that feels like somebody might get in trouble, but not really. But so I got a message that said, you may have already covered this in your podcast. If so, could you point me to that episode? Our RevOps team here has grown from 3 to 15 over the last year, and our formal org chart is sort of wacky and hard to follow. Just curious what a successful RevOps org chart looks like in your eyes. Which we have sort of talked about this a couple times, like in passing, what our org chart looks like from a RevOps standpoint. We haven't really like gone down the rabbit hole theoretically of what I think a successful RevOps org chart looks like in general. I have strong thoughts and opinions as usual, but I'll defer, let you guys kick it off first, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
That's a weighted question.
Now you know that I'm like waiting to jump on you. You were ready to talk until I ended it that
more
way.
Pressure.
Yeah. What do you think, Jonathan?
I mean, yeah, you do need to kind of create avenues within your like if you're a 3-person team, that's one thing. You're pretty nimble. You're kind of all working together on the same stuff. If you get up to 15, then organization starts to become a bit of a thing, and you don't want to be stepping on each other's toes. So I think then you kind of have to start to look at, I think analyzing is going to be one of your buckets. Operations is going to be one of your buckets. Sales in general is going to be operations, like sales operations is going to be another bucket. So you kind of have to figure out what buckets make sense to kind of start to divide and conquer.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, Brandon, do you have thoughts?
So that sounds right to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's an okay answer. I'll give you that. It's an okay
I'll take
answer.
That.
Like, it's not. I'm not blown away by what you've said, but like, yeah, I mean, your RevOps team would be fine if that's what happened. But I mean, I obviously I'm a huge advocate for RevOps being a standalone department first and foremost. I think that's super, super important. We do that here. I report directly to the CEO, and then all of operations reports to me. The way I would see a successful revenue operations sort of org chart. Sorry, my dog is like itching herself right next to me. If you guys can hear that jingle, the way I would see a successful org chart for RevOps working, if I was like 15 people, right, would be. RevOps is its own umbrella, head of revenue operations at the top. And you get, director of revenue operations - marketing, director of revenue operations - sales, director of revenue operations - CS, essentially, underneath that umbrella. And probably somebody that's like director of business analytics also, right? In that sort of like first level of reports directly to the head of revenue operations. And then sort of back in below that, different like systems analysts, Salesforce admins under the sales umbrella, right? HubSpot administration under the marketing team, and sort of roll them in business analytics, data science, whatever, underneath the business science or business analytics director. But the reason I would sort of keep this all in the RevOps umbrella, and I would also probably work in sort of revenue operations titles across the board, because one of the things that I don't want to lose, even if I'm a 15-person company, is my revenue operations manager - sales. If I have a massive marketing project or a massive CS project, I want to be able to loop that person in to those, right? And so maybe I have 3 people that are more sales oriented in revenue operations, but that's not going to help their career development. I want them to have a RevOps title so that I can arguably say, you know what? Like the 2 guys in sales ops, I'm actually going to pull you over to work on this CS project because we're revenue operations. We can work everywhere, right? And so I know it's not your wheelhouse, but it's good exposure for you. I want you to work on this. We need resources to help us with CS. It just provides more flexibility to keep that sort of like nimble structure. But from an org chart standpoint, pretty straightforward vision of what that org chart looks like. I think the nomenclature is just helpful in sort of making sure your team is always prepared and has the growth trajectory that they need to become a head of RevOps in the future or learn other facets of the business like marketing, sales, CS, right? If they come in for CS, I want them to learn marketing and sales. I want them to be a resource for those teams. So if I give them a title like revenue operations - sales, they have a title that allows them to go work in these other umbrellas, which is super important to me.
Yep. I like that. And I think one thing to add to that is I see this happen in all across departments, not just revenue operations, but marketing everywhere, is they get too top heavy.
Totally.
And you don't have enough doers and you have way too many people thinking high level. And then, that becomes, it's expensive for one. You're paying for a lot of managers who don't actually put the foot to the pedal.
Totally.
And then, two, you don't have enough resources.
Are you accusing me of not putting my foot to the pedal? Because I want to point out, I roll my sleeves up probably as much as any other ops person at the company most of the time.
And that's where I would say the ideal scenario is. Like, what you want to avoid is just kind of your typical, like what you see as your director up top just telling everybody else what to do. You want that director up top to actually be able to get their hands dirty too, in a perfect world. I know there's scenarios where that doesn't happen and it works, but for the most part.
I mean, the reality is like me as, the head of revenue operations, it'll become less and less as we scale, right? Like right now, I still roll my sleeves up a lot and help you guys with projects and even map them out and project manage them like day to day. And that's just not scalable long term. And then also, if we get to like 9 people in the future, I won't. But there's never gonna be a universe where I'm not doing like 10 hours of rolling my sleeve up a week, because if I'm not doing that, I'm not actually understanding what you guys are working on, what problems you're running into, what blockers I need to remove for you, how I can help advise and help you grow, because I'm not in the weeds with you. I'm just looking at it top down, like, hey, Jonathan, go do this. And then you're like, I can't. And I'm like, well, I don't understand why. Get it done. Right? Like, that's not, it's not actually helpful to my business or helpful to me. I maybe that's me personally, but if I was working for somebody like that, I'd be pissed. So no, not going to happen. But yeah, like, I think operations is a unique world where, if you're the head of revenue operations, you're still going to have to roll your sleeves up. You should, because it's the only way you're going to understand what the team is actually working on a day-to-day basis and what you should prioritize. So that would be my ideal org chart.
That's why I believe so much in promoting within, right? Yeah. Like you've done the job before, you understand the business, you understand all the different angles and the complexities of it. And then now you get that promotion, then you can hire people under you. You know exactly what is needed of them and how it actually is, works day to day. And if they go on vacation, it doesn't work out, whatever happens, some emergency, you can still step in, right? Mm-hmm. Like the business is not reliant on any one person.
Right.
And we kind of talked about this with Andy Mowat in that episode too, but along the same lines, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And having just a deep understanding of the business already baked in is such a win, because bringing an outside person in, they've got such an uphill battle trying to figure out how the business operates, where all the data points are,
time to ramp, and how they
board. This is maybe like an interesting one, but I don't think I would ever be a head of revenue operations if I didn't spend at least like my first 90 days at the business really trying to understand the tech stack and the Salesforce instance. Like, I actually think that, because I was our Salesforce admin when I first joined the company. Now I don't do a lot of Salesforce admin work anymore, but when I first joined, I did all of the Salesforce admin work. And that understanding, knowing the framework of how our Salesforce operates and how it connects with everything and what tools we're using and all of that, it doesn't go away at all. But 2 years later, I still rely on that day to day to understand and coach and like say what we're going to do, what's valuable, how to do things, understand how that works with all the other systems. Like it is just like fundamentally important to get that foundation when you're leading an ops team. It's just, I cannot stress that enough. So yeah, to your point, org chart, I went through what mine would look like. That guy at the top needs to be hands-on. Absolutely does. Mm-hmm. Super important.
And the guys below that guy at the top will have, not to say they wouldn't respect them, but there will be so much more respect there too at the same time. You're going to have so much more camaraderie on your team if you're all kind of in that together, as opposed to just having kind of a person on top of the pedestal.
Totally.
Bargain orders.
Yeah, totally. You're also going to be more productive because that person at the top is probably pretty good at what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at the top. True. So get them involved.
You would know.
Yeah. You never know, but
yeah, you never know.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you guys want to add? Otherwise, this is a pretty quick little quick and dirty episode here.
No, I like Jonathan's answer for teams that are like smaller, specializing per skill set, and then once you do get the director level people, I think I like Jordan's answer. So I'm going to say this one's a tie between you two.
So I would actually, I'll push back a little bit here, because I think Jonathan's answer was good, except for I want them to have cross-departmental exposure and work when I'm smaller, and we're smaller here. I want my ops people, I want Jonathan to work closely with the sales team, even though he's more marketing focused, because as we scale and get to 15 folks in the future, I want that director to be the guy that has experience cross-departmentally so that my head of director of revenue operations -marketing has a ton of sales experience and a ton of CS experience, so he can pull his team over to work on those things at any given time. So I kind of like Jonathan's answer. I'm still not totally sold, is where I'm at on that. It was good. It wasn't great. That's what I'm saying.
It's good.
I'll win you guys over eventually.
Yeah, probably not. Really, almost certainly not. All right. Well, everybody, it was awesome. Thanks, guys, for going through account scoring with me. Everybody who's listening, please go give us 5 stars, write us a review on Apple. Send us your questions for this week on LinkedIn. Feel free to email them to us or message them on LinkedIn. It's totally fine. You can even
tell Jordan where he's wrong.
Yeah, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm right. Probably fine either way, one way or the other. And you could even make a LinkedIn post asking a question and tag us, and we'll come answer it there, and then still answer it on the podcast. Just saying. And by the way, flattery goes a long way. That's all I'm going to put out there. Anyways,
you're still reeling from last week's flattery.
Yeah. Just anything to stoke that ego, baby. Anything to stoke that ego. You just got to be honest about who you are as a person at some point, right? And I know what I want.
All right. Fair enough.
All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye, guys.